Hi everyone, Gustaw here. In this video, I would like to show you how we can build this particular KPI card, which is driven by the single selection slicer, which allows you to pick which comparative metrics would you like to compare your actuals to the specific metric, which might be like the previous year or the target in this particular use case. Also, as you can see here, we might also have a different use cases where we have two comparative metrics displayed simultaneously in a KPI card, which is built like this, but we will cover a bit different use case when we actually want the end user to drive the selection through the slicer selection to allow you to compare your actuals only to a single scenario. So first of all, what we need just from the beginning is an additional disconnected table. It can look something like this one, where we have this table scenario selection. Of course, it can be named in a different way. We have the ID, we have the column with the names. We might have additional columns depending on the different use cases and so on. The most important will be like having the sort order for these selections and the name, or optionally the display name column as well. Of course, in your use case, you might include much more comparative metrics, or you can also have a different metrics, still like the double metrics, two metrics, but it might be completely different. In that case, it's the previous year and the target, just to show you an examples. So once we have this disconnected table build, it can be, for example, built using this kind of ellipsis. We can press the enter data and then create a disconnected table, which looks similar to what I just showed you. Once we have this disconnected table, we can simply use any kind of the slicer which allows us or the end users to drive the selection. So it can be the button slicer, as we can see here, or the list slicer, or it can be like the drop-down list or any other slicer which allows you to pick the specific scenario. And now, if you change the scenario, you can see the corresponding reference label is now different, because we are now comparing the actuals to the target. If I switch to the previous year, we are now comparing the actuals to the previous year. And this is also the reason why the absolute and relative variance is different, because now we are comparing to a different scenario. So as you might notice, there are certain elements in the KPI cards which stay fixed even if we change the scenario, and there are some elements that are dynamic. So as you can see, for instance, the title and the subtitle stays fixed because we're still analyzing the revenue, so the metrics didn't change. The unit for this metric also didn't change, as well as the date range. The actuals, actually, which is here, which is the main like prominent callout value here, is also fixed because it's just an actuals. So the most important thing here, what we would like to impact, is the reference line here, which consists of the title, as you can see here, of the value of the comparative metric, which is that part, and the detail section of the reference line, which is that part. So let's consider how we can influence all of these elements, because as of today, the field parameters are not working with the KPI cards. So from that reason, we just have to use like the switch-based, DAX-based approaches in order to have this dynamic calculation for the comparative scenario. So let's start with the visualization pane, and let's check which elements we have to apply in a dynamic way to achieve similar result as we have here. So as mentioned, the callout value will stay the same. So we can just apply our main metrics as the value. We are having in our KPI cards, we only have like the one main metric, which is the actuals. So this is just placed as the value here. As we have it here already applied, we can go now to the reference labels. So for our cards, which contains the revenue actuals, we just have to bring one additional comparative scenario metric, which is in that case called the revenue scenario. So we can just add as an add label field. So let's quickly check how this particular measure look like. And this one. So we are using the selected value, and we are using the switch, and depending on whether we are on a we have selection of the previous year, we are retrieving the value of the previous year. And if we select on our slicer selection the target, in that case, we would like to bring the revenue for the target. So these values are referring referring to the previous year, this value refers to the target. And this is like our revenue scenario value. So this one is gonna be displayed exactly as this element. So we have applied this metric, this calculation here, we added as a label. And now we have more components to be added. So the value section actually displays whatever we have here as a value. So for instance, just to show you, if I apply bold, you can see that this particular part is now bolded. So I unbold because I just wanted to make it like in a default mode, in a base mode, without any kind of additional formatting styling like bold, italic, and so on. One additional thing that we would like to impact is the title. In our case, the title has to be dynamic as well, because in some cases we are comparing actuals to target. In other cases, we are comparing the actuals to the previous year, depending on the slicer selection. So this title also have to be dynamic to make it work in a similar way. So in that case, instead of having the field name title, we can, using the dropdown, is change the field name to the custom. If we have the custom, we can implement the text using the FX button. So let's press it and check which measure we are using here. So this is the card reference title. And this is that one. So once again, we are checking our selected value for our display name. In that case, just to remember, our display name is just the PY or target in abbreviated form. And the result is, if it's actually, if it's not blank, so if we actually having some selection, it might be like the previous year or the target, we are retrieving the selected scenario, which means in that case, the abbreviated name of the previous year or the target concatenated with this sign in order to achieve this visual effect. We want to still have this one to like, it's like the visual sign that something will also appear on the right side of this title. This is quite optional. I just implemented like the one single space here in a case that we won't have any kind of the selection made on a slicer. We can assume that we have this single selection and some scenarios just has to be applied. So in that particular case, it won't be so necessary to apply any additional placeholders in case that no selections are like the blank. Nevertheless, it can help in some like niche situations when actually this selection is not made. So I will just quickly erase that to show you how it can work. So in that case, just of course not mentioning about these signs, you can see that now the title disappear entirely. So let's bring our slicer back. And let's assume we have covered our title section. Then we actually have covered the values because it derives directly from the revenue for our scenario. And then we have this additional detail section. So let's dive in. Let's go to the reference labels. And then assuming we are starting with the selected label all, it is important to remember that on a dropdown list, we have to change from the all to the specific label, which we like to apply this additional details. So let's go to the revenue scenario. Once again, let's go to the detail section. You can see that in this particular case, we have like using the uncommon additional calculation, additional measure, which allows you to bring the sign along with the nominal variances, along with the relative variance. Of course, it can be much more simplified. You can, depending on your use case, bring only the absolute variance, the nominal variance, or only the relative, or vice versa. Or it can be like concatenated in a different order, and so on. It all depends. This particular use case just have this additional concatenated variances and the sign. So we have to take care of two things. First of all, we just have to bring this additional calculation here in the detail section. And we can potentially also take care of the color for the fonts and optionally for the background to have this sentiment color and allow user to see whether it's like the positive or the negative change in that case. So let's dive into the simplified V1 KPI card. It's this one. Before diving into this one, I also described it in a different video, so I will drop a link to that one, what is like the logic behind this measure. But I just wanted to quickly let you know that in order to create this one, we just need two additional measures as well. So this this is gonna be important. We have to have like the nominal variance, and we have to have like the relative variance, assuming we just want to have to create the design as it is showcased here. So if you'd like to have this design reflected, we just need two additional measures. So the one is for our nominal variance, and it's simply the calculation which includes our actuals, includes the revenue for our scenario selected, which is like already dynamic based on a switch. And we have a simple calculation as here to get the nominal variance. What we also need is the variance, the relative one. So it can look like this one. So of course, the relative variances can depend on the business like logic. So it can be structured in a bit different way as it's showcased here. Nevertheless, this particular use case has this logic applied, then both the actuals and the scenario value cannot be blank. So it has to be some kind of the number, and it also have to be greater than zero. So it has not to be like zero. It has not to be equal to zero, and it also cannot be the negative number. So there are specific use case for this one. It's like have to be like the positive numbers, and both both values like has to be like some numbers and positive, not blanks, not zero, and not negative. And in that case, we just use the divide function to divide our actuals minus scenario value, which is in that case the nominal variance, divided by the scenario value. In that case, we get the relative variance that suits specific use cases. As mentioned, it might look a little bit different depending on the business logic. So once we have these two additional measures already mentioned, which is the revenue variance absolute scenario and the relative scenario, of course, in your use case, you can base like not the revenues, but maybe any other metrics that you would like to analyze. So then we can move back to our CARP. So we are referencing these two additional created measures. We are applying specific format. Just to mention, it doesn't have to be applied on the level of the measure here. We can just have additional different measures when we can actually store these format strings. So it also works. This one is a little bit more simplified approach when we actually have these strings directly within the measure. And then there is a set of different conditions depending on whether the relative is also displayed, whether we would like to display like the relative and absolute, because it depends. Sometimes the relative might be blank. So if it's blank, we only would like to display the absolute, and so on. So there are like certain conditions that I mentioned in one of the previous videos. Once we have this measure which allows us to create this concatenated KPI card, we can use it here as a reference label details section, which will look like that one. And one additional thing that we can take care of, as mentioned before, is the color. And we have like at least three different ways to achieve the conditionally formatted colors. So one, as you can see, is based on a field value. It's one of the most recommended one. It requires to add one additional measure. However, it allows us to keep it more unified in terms of the further changes, implementation, and so on. So we're just bringing the reference to our nominal variance, and depending on whether it's like the higher than zero, equal to zero, or below the zero, we are retrieving a specific measure, which is corresponding to specific sentiment color, which might be like the green, gray, and red, or any other, depending on the color palette you are using in your report. So this is the one approach. Just to let you know, we can also have two different approaches. So I just quickly show you how it can work. Let's assume we have this duplicated card. Let's go to the visual. Let's go to the color. The first color is responsible for the font. The second is responsible for the background color as it's stated here. So let's erase the conditional color here from the background and from the background and from the font, and let's focus on the font exclusively. So let's bring the FX button once again, and I will show you two different methods, because the one that I show you now is based on a field value, but there are also two different ways. So we can also use rules. In terms of using the rules, we have two options. We can bring actually the same measure which creates our KPI card, which is quickly check its dynamic scenario, which is that one. So this is the measure which like includes this concatenated nominal and relative variance. So it's like the form of the text. So the rules are a bit different comparing to having the values. This is just the text. So just for instance, if that contains, for instance, the minus sign, because the text will contain minus if it's a negative, let's return the color, in that case, red, as an example. If that does not contain minus, it can be green. For instance, in this particular use case, if that contains like no, because we have the no change, if there is like the zero change in the year over year or the target comparison, we can also bring like no or no change. And let's say we can bring the color gray in that case. So these are like supplemental ones, like optional rules here. And now you can see that now it's already been marked as green. Let's change to the target. Now it's red, so it's working fine. It's working based on whether the minus sign appears or not. So this is the second approach. And the third approach can be based also on rules. Let's say we now will be basing this conditional formatting not on a KPI card as a text, but rather on a nominal variance, which is called, in that case, like this. And now we can apply the rules. So if the number is like greater or higher than minimum value, which is like infinite minimum value here, and is below the zero, let's mark it as red. If it's, let's say, higher than zero, not like higher or equal, but rather like it's zero, it's higher than zero and it's lower than maximum, let's bring the green color as here, and I press OK. So now if the variance is positive, it's marked as green. If it's negative, it should be marked as red, which works fine. We can also cover some edge use cases where, for instance, the number is equal to zero, for instance, and in that case you would like to retrieve, for instance, the gray color. Maybe in some cases, if it's blank, retrieve gray color and press OK. Of course, we won't see that this reflection now because it's either like the negative positive, but it will be reflected if there's variances will be like zero blank, depending on also on the context of this KPI card, of this KPI concatenated calculation, which allows us to bring this detail level. Nevertheless, it's basically how we can apply that. So long story short, we just need this disconnected table for our scenario selection, and we need this switch-based approach to bring the title, to bring the value, and to bring the detailed section. Of course, the detailed section can be designed in many different ways. It all depends on how you would like to design your KPI card and which elements it should include, whether only the nominal or only the relative or both, as it is here. So for today is everything I want to share with you. I also dropped a link regarding the different video when I mentioned more details regarding the KPI card and so on. So if you enjoyed the content so far, feel free to subscribe to the channel and see you again next time. Take care. Bye.